Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7, streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you to Devine Dial for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville, Robin Collier for doing the same in Taos, KCEI. If you'd like to reach me, Nave at jamesnave.com. Nave is spelled N-A-V-E. Like to remind you, we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to learn more about how to dig into your writing, imaginativestorm.com is a great place to go. And I'd like to thank Walter Parks for our theme song, walterparks.com for more on Walter's music. Today, I have a new friend, someone I met online. Sometimes an email comes across your screen and you respond to it. This is what happened to me. Cynthia Morris's email came across the screen. She's a writing coach. She's an author. She teaches workshops in Paris. I love Paris. And I'd been keeping up with Cynthia's emails. And for some reason, this one just reminded me that I could reach out to her and connect. So we did. Loved the first conversation. She's collaborating a bit with Allegra and me, my creative collaborator on the Imaginative Storm Writing Project, and we're collaborating with her. So I've invited her to join us here at Twice 5 Miles Radio. Cynthia, welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio.
Thanks for having me, Nave. I'm super excited to have a conversation with you. We could talk endlessly.
Oh, I know that. So what are we going to talk about? Tell me something I need to know, Cynthia Morris.
What do you need to know? Oh, that's a big question. Need to know about me or about life in general?
I don't know, but I do have an idea floating around. I work with a group called Leaf Global Arts. And one of the themes of Leaf Global Arts, and they produce a festival in Asheville called the Leaf Festival, also the Leaf Retreat, and other events in downtown Asheville and other places around the area as well. And the theme Leaf Global Arts has always had is world changers. What is a world changer? And you have a book floating around in the world, Busy Woman's Guide to Writing a World-Changing Book. And I thought, wow, you've probably given a lot of thought to what it means to change the world, large or small. So I would love for you to just start out talking about what does it mean to you to be a world changer? The world is changing all the time. How do we participate in that change?
Well, I believe that we really can't control much, but we can start by changing ourselves. So the things that we want to be, who we want to, what we want to create and how we want to live is world changing. And I believe that writing a book or actually putting any creative effort out into the world or finishing it will change you. And I think finishing things is important to this change because it's easy to do a lot of things partly and then start back at the beginning. But when you go all the way and get to those challenging moments at the end and overcome a lot of your obstacles or inner fears or beliefs, you are not going to come out the same person. I think that when we finish something, there's a gift waiting for us at the finish line. We don't know what that is. I've got some examples I can share. So writing a world-changing book. First of all, I work with people who are writing books that usually have a big purpose. They're either hoping to get the word out about their work. Often it's people who've been working in a field for their whole lives, and now it's time to do what I consider more legacy work, where they're able to write a book and it reaches more people and puts their work out there in the world in a different way. So that's one way that the world could be changed by someone picking up a book and reading it, being inspired, and their day is different. Even if your day is different, you're changing the world. If you go out there with a different attitude, something that allows you to connect more easily with the world and people, that will change the world. So I'm not talking about like passing laws necessarily or making big change. It's those small change, the idea of be the change. So if you write your book, you will change. I can guarantee that you will not be the same person.
It's an interesting concept here. When I have heard the words world changing, I tend to think large, change the world. It's grand. What we're talking about and what you're talking about is is small and yet
Yes.
large at the same time. It's impossible to avoid changing in the world and thus changing something of the world rather than the whole world.
I mean, very few people can change the whole world. I think this idea that it has to be big and this idea of go big or be big really stops a lot of us. It stops me because how do I start? What do I do? Who little me? But I can change my day every time I write. I've just finished a book, writing my own book, but when I was working on it, every day that I wrote it, I would go out feeling great. I felt empowered. I felt strong. I felt sexy, alive. I was alive. That changes me every day. And this is why I'm so want anybody who wants to do any creative pursuit. I'll just keep talking about writing because that's my main area of focus. But if you go around with these unlived dreams or aspirations, it's like this Santa bag of gifts that you're burdened by the things that you want because you might be afraid or you think you don't have time. And I'm like, just try it, give it a start. I'm thinking of rebranding my business. I probably won't, but I like to call myself the lower the bar coach, like lower the bar. People have expectations such as I'm going to write every day for 2 hours or I'm going to write. And it's like, what about start with 30 minutes and build up to that? That's going to be way more manageable than taking on something huge.
And the lower bars allow for much, much more productivity. Ironically, the lower bar will allow you to achieve what you thought reaching for the higher bar would accommodate.
Yeah. And I think your imaginative storm sessions are a really great example of this. 10 minutes of writing. What is that going to do? Well, you've seen what it does. It changes people, it transforms people, and doing that in community and sharing. So someone might be like, that's not very long, but that has an impact that you have seen and people feel makes a big difference. That is changing people's worlds. They leave those calls different.
I've measured how much you can generate in 10 minutes. At a reasonably easy pace, you can generate about a page and a half of handwritten material. That's around 150 words or so. So if you do a 10-minute stint every day for 365 days, you'll have 365 pages of writing, which is a big, big book in anybody's world. All of us have that in us. It's not that hard to do.
So the book that I just wrote is a novel. When I set out to write it, I announced that I wanted to write a best-selling novel. I really still want that. And I had to question that. Like, what does that mean? What is important about that? What do I think that is going to be like? Obviously, it's like, well, I want to be rich and famous and everyone loves me. Okay, that's one level. But when I got down to what is this really about, it was like, I want to write the best book that I can. I want to give this everything. I'm going to be humble I like to think of like kneel at the altar of my craft. I'm going to learn and study with people and work with an editor and go beyond what I thought I could do. And there were many times when I really had to let go of some things. There were things when my editor suggested them and I said, no, that's not negotiable. And then she talked to me about it. And then, okay, I let it go. So all of that for the sake of going into the world with this novel and feeling that this is the very best I could have done. And I really like it. I feel good about it. Will it be a bestseller? I don't know. I will do my best to put it out there, which leads me to my creative edge for this year, which is getting out there more. I've been in the creative cave for 2 years. It's time to get out and connect with people like you and other people. That is scary. I don't want to do that, but I want this book to be out there.
Why is it scary and why are you feeling this resistance, do you think? You've been at this a long time. The reason I'm asking the question You're not a newcomer. You've been coaching people for years. You've been writing for years. You have a huge momentum, and yet it's scary, you say. What's going on with that?
That's a great coachy question, and I love it. And the thing that's true for me, I've been writing for 30 years and coaching for 25, and I have a lot of skills and accomplishments, and I've earned some confidence. I've earned some of the things that, we hope after that long working in a field. And I'm still a person. I still have the things that are difficult for me. Reaching out and asking for something, like reaching out and asking for a blurb, reaching out and asking for anything is really hard for me. I would much rather sit behind my screen and write an article or an essay or even make a video. So when I say creative edge, I like this as a way to frame the year instead of goals, or I can't choose just one word because that I can't do just one word. What is the thing? It's a very specific skill or element of craft that if I focused on that, it would really move the needle for me in what I'm trying to achieve. And so when I thought about promoting my novel and I was journaling about it, and I thought, what if instead of like doing all the things that I'm supposed to do, social media and whatever, what if promoting the book and putting this book out there were a spiritual practice? What would that be like for me? What would I have to do? And this was where the creative edge came from. It was you have to connect more. So when I say it's scary and it's a creative edge for me, it's also part of being a more full human. I think we feel the most human when we're asking for help, when we're making those kind of connections, not when we're being the one who knows everything and is all accomplished, but when we're saying, I need you, I am human, I need you. I'm looking at it in these different ways versus like, oh, this is all going to be so scary. This is going to grow me. When I get through this year of putting this novel out there, I will not be the same person. I will hopefully be changed in a way that makes me fuller and makes me more of who I'm here to be. I don't want to try to be someone I'm not. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. And I love this idea of promoting the book as a spiritual practice. It's counterintuitive to the way people think of selling, promoting, social media, advertising, getting the word out, taking the product to market. And the human element is there as well. If you are going to have a bestseller, you must have customers and a lot of them to buy the book. And that implies somebody has to be supporting this momentum other than just Cynthia Morris. You have this contrast between the things that we don't necessarily think of as spiritual. I'm going to sell, I'm going to hustle, going to make a poster, I'm going to a conference and set up a table and work the crowd, work the room. I'm going to read at an open mic. I'm going to work my audience. Most people don't think of that as a spiritual practice. And yet I love the notion of it as a spiritual practice. Can you talk more about how you are blending those two ideas to make this happen for you?
It's a real balance and a blend between doing the things that we know we need to do and that we may not want to do. Some of the things you mentioned, social media is the thing that comes to my mind, like making posts and whatnot, and connecting with our authentic expression. And this is something as a coach, I'm always like, well, what is your sweet spot? What is your nature? What is fun and easy for you? And focus more on that. Not that we're not going to do those other things, but bringing our true selves to the conversation. So things like being more vulnerable. What are the things I want to talk about when I think about so-called talking points for my novel and the articles that I want to write to support the novel? It's like, this is about leading a conversation. This is about, what do I want to talk about? What do I want to talk about with others? And what do I want for the readers? That's something that I think for fiction, people might not think that the reader and the outcome you want for the reader is as top of mind as it might be for a nonfiction book. Connecting with people. Okay, who is this for? What do I want for them? What kind of conversations do I want to have for them? How do I want my novel to change their world? That to me is part of a spiritual practice because it goes to something that's deeper than just how many followers do I have? How many sales do I get? And also with something like a book, anything we're putting out into the world, whatever our goals are, there's so much of it that's out of our control. So that's part of, to me, a spiritual practice of surrendering, letting go of outcome. The more it seems like we let go of thinking things have to be a certain way, the more delightful surprises seem to come. So that's part of it too. Like, well, if I put this out there, if I come on this radio show with you, if I do other things, I have no idea what will happen. And I don't even think about it after, or let it go completely. Don't worry about that. So that's what I mean by it's a weird balance, both having a desired outcome and impact, and then also not being attached to it or upset if it doesn't look the way we think it should.
Yes, and the spiritual aspect, the personal aspect is, of course, generating the story, discovering what's there, making the book, getting it onto the page, organizing it, designing it, finally getting it between the covers and having the thing available for me to buy, the listeners to buy, whomever wants to buy the book. So there's your spiritual thing. And then the marketing part is a different approach altogether. I would like for you to personalize this a bit for us now and tell us the title of your new book. Give us a sense of the story of your book, what it did for you as the author, and what you hope it will do for the people who receive it. It's one thing to talk about the book in general, but you have an actual product ready to go, and it's getting ready to sashay out into the world right now. So I want to know what that's about.
Okay, thank you, because I'm excited about it. It is a manuscript. It's going to the copy editor on Monday. I've hired the book designers to work on the design, and it's a novel called Her Lisbon Colors. That was not the title for most of the time. This book is about what happens when you've done all the right things in life and ended up in the wrong place. And by wrong, I mean the place that's not really you. It's about a character who is doing all the practical things, and she's achieved everything she's wanted except for the great love of her life and that sense of home with another person. So something happens that prompts her to get out of her shell and out of her practical suit, so to speak, and go to Lisbon. And there she meets somebody who changes her life. She falls in love with a hot young rock climber and embarks on a romance that will change her, but not in the ways that we think a romance will change. This book is loosely inspired by an experience that I had when I went to Lisbon some years ago. The character's not me, it's all very changed, but some of the general arc of the story is some of my lived experiences. And I always thought, this is a great story. This will be a great romance. I'll write a romance novel. And then I realized that it is not a romance because it doesn't HEA. There's no happily ever after with the guy or the love. It's a much different kind of book. It's much more about finding yourself, reuniting with your creativity, which I realize is kind of what I'm all about in my life. All the books I write, no matter what, they're fiction or nonfiction, they're essentially about reconnecting with who we are through creativity.
What is the name of your character?
Darla Clark.
Darla Clark. So Darla Clark.
Darlin.
Darling. Well, we're not too far from a country song. From a Lisbon country song, Darlin' Darla. I'm from Asheville. I'm not too far from Nashville, Tennessee. I grew up with the Grand Ole Opry, so I'll go there without any trouble at all. Darla, Her Lisbon Colors. Why colors? Flag, sunrise, sunset, rainbow?
She does reconnect with her artist and becomes an artist, a watercolor artist and a food illustrator. So this was really fun. I gave her this creative career that I would love. And that was just really fun to kind of rewrite the story with some factors that it's like, well, if this had happened to me, that would be really great. And so I will be doing some of the illustrations in the novel. I am a watercolor artist and I do illustrations. And so I will be doing some of the illustrations that she does in the book to accompany the book.
Does Darla have a dark side?
Well, we all have a dark side. Yes. Is it revealed? Yes. It has to be, right? Because the best characters are dimensional. And I remember when I was first doing this and I was like, oh no, all the sex and drugs and alcohol and the wine, the Portuguese wine. Like, I can't write about that. That's just, and then I was like, wait, no, that is the good stuff. And then all of the bad mistakes, the really bad choices that she makes. I was like, oh no, hide those under the rug. No, that's what people love. As I said, some of this is inspired by some of my experiences and some of the choices that I made that when I look back, I was like, why would you do that? Of course, Nave, we don't make choices from any kind of logical place most of the time, hopefully from an ethical place in general, but not always like doing the quote unquote right thing. So this is what writing this book changed me. It was so profound to when I finally disconnected me from the character and created the character as a separate person and was able to see her in the third person and, at a distance, I was able to see myself with so much more compassion. I have this whole series of unwritten articles called The Dark Side of Coaching. And one of them is this notion that I have to have my act together and do it all right and do it well. And to a degree, yes, but I'm also human. So I'm going to make mistakes and not do things well. But it was only through fictionalizing some of these experiences and fictionalizing me that I saw myself as a human like everybody else. Not that I don't want you to think I'm saying like, oh, I thought I was so perfect and great, but we have the illusion that we're doing it all right. And then you're like, oh, and it's okay if I'm not. It's okay to make bad choices sometimes.
When you pull back from Darla as being more you and started to refer to Darla in the third person, is that when you were more free to write about these scenes that you hesitated to write about in the beginning?
Yes, and more free to fictionalize things and it became really playful. There was a real break last summer when I was working with my editor, Kristen Tate. I got her notes back and it's like, you still don't really quite have it. You don't really have the ending. You don't really have the spine of the book. And here are some things to look at. And once I was able to it's like breaking off an ice floe and floating free out into the sea. Like I was finally able to break into more creativity. And then it got really fun and super energizing for me. I wrote a scene that's in the middle of the novel that is just so fun and exhilarating and changes everything in the book. And then it really unhooked from even like, so the thing that I was attached to was the time period. And it was before everybody had ubiquitous cell phones. It was before ubiquitous social media. And I was adamant there will be no cell phones. And she schooled me and taught me why that wasn't necessarily going to work if I wanted the book to have the impact that I want. Starting from there and breaking free from facts. And I think this is really helpful for anyone who's writing a fictionalized story based on their life. The facts are not the important thing. It's the emotional truth. And I had the fortune to study with Grace Paley some years ago when I was a young writer. She was a great American short story writer. And she said, write the truth, and then explained it's not about the facts, it's about the emotional truth. So that has made a big difference for me. If I'm fictionalizing this, I still want the character to feel real and feel dimensional. And I want readers to be able to connect with her and feel that as she's going through her story.
There's an old song about the elusive butterfly of love. I wake up in the morning and there's the elusive butterfly of love out there in my window and I can't quite catch it. Authenticity sometimes seems like that elusive butterfly. Are we actually closer to the truth than we think if we just simply stay in where we are right now? How do you measure the present experiences that you're having? How do you measure their authenticity rather than I'm going to try to find the truth?
Truth is different for everybody, and everybody will have their own definition of that and experience of that, especially in their writing. So I don't pretend to know what that will be like for everybody. And I wrote an article about this on my Substack about being emotional. And I found that for fiction writing and probably for other memoir for sure, the emotions that you bring to any moment in the story are something that you have to feel. And how do we feel that? And then how do we convey that in words? And how do we get that across to a reader so that they feel something? My whole life, I've been trying to pretend or go around as somebody who's not as emotional as I am. I was teased when I was a girl for being too sensitive and too emotional. This was one of those things, Nave, where I was like, oh, this thing that was supposedly not good in my growing up environment is absolutely required to write well and to write this well. And so that was a return of something that I think I had lost.
You just gave me an idea about that. To measure the truth is difficult to do. And yet I'm thinking when I find myself generating written material or speaking and dictating or writing it out longhand or typing it, however I get it out, when I become possessive of the moment, I do not want this moment to end. I'm jealous of the next moment coming along because I think it might steal this essentialness that I'm feeling. That's a way to measure when I'm on some kind of emotional truth.
Yeah, you feel it. Like there's something like it's a quickening or whatever. It doesn't have to be like, oh, like a buoyant, happy thing, but like you feel it. And I felt it when I wrote that scene that's kind of in the center of the novel. It was just like, wow, this is it. This is this feeling of something really being moved in the character, in the story, in me. And so it's not that everything has to be what Kristen calls a marquee moment, but that throughout the book, there are these moments where she's having an experience and it's conveyed to the reader.
And the message that I'm interested in getting out on this show for the last 8 years now, the message is we all have this capacity.
For sure.
This isn't an exclusive thing somebody's born with over here and somebody over here is not born with. Do we take advantage of this birthright? Are we willing to show up and let that experience happen? Are you willing to become possessive of a moment because you're so into the joy of it, you don't want it to end, like a great dinner or a conversation with a friend?
How do you capture the emotion? I really worked on that in the novel. I hope I achieved it. I achieved it.
It is difficult to capture the emotion in text. And yet, if we let ourselves just be in it, the emotion will somehow manage to find its way and fit into what we're trying to say in a way that will eventually become clear to the people reading it. In The Emperor of Ice Cream by Wallace Stevens, it's this fanciful poem that may or may not make any sense. And it does make sense, but it takes a while to get to it. But he offers up all of these images that could or could not make sense. And then in the middle of the poem, he says, let be finale of scene. Let be finale of scene. So rather than going, well, it seems like this, but I don't know, I translate that to say, just let it be. Let be the finale. That's it. That's the end. So that moment that one is in, feeling that sense of flow and possessiveness of the time is a good indicator that you're on some kind of truth. We'll see where it goes.
What you said, a good indicator of that we're on to the truth, that is going to be something everybody knows inside themselves, whether it's a feeling or a thought, be able to identify that. And you also said things coming in time, in layers. The first thing you write might not be that, but you go back and say, what am I really trying to say here? What do I really want to say here? And letting yourself be revealed to yourself and to the page a little bit more a little bit more, a little bit more.
Yeah. I'm curious, is there a way that I could get you to read a bit of your book? We'd love to hear some of it.
I'll just read a few paragraphs. Darla didn't enjoy crowds, especially one so bright and well intentioned. The priest was the only other person in black apart from her. Darla wore her work outfit, white shirt, black pants, and a blazer, a pair of shoes that weren't quite heels but looked professional enough. She felt out of place among the dramatic patterns and drapey cuts. But it was a funeral. Feeling off was normal. She shook off her discomfort and took a seat at the back of the yurt. The room filled slowly. Murmurs accompanied the gentle sitar music. Boulder's irrepressible cheer had taken a day off. It was uncharacteristically gray outside, contributing to the somber mood. At the front of the yurt, a small podium was framed by two giant bouquets and a poster-sized picture of Lauren. Darla inhaled the Nag Champa smoke and pushed down her anxiety with righteousness. Lauren would have hated all this, she thought. She would have done away with the seating, put on a bumping tune, and demanded they all rise up and dance with her.
Well, don't stop there.
Oh, good. Always leave them wanting more. As a performer, you know that.
I do know that. Yurt. Fantastic way to set the tone. Can you talk a bit about that choice? As soon as you introduced yurt, my entire frame changed. And you must know that's happening. So one word changes the whole frame for the listener. Talk more about how that factors into your thinking as a writer.
It starts in Boulder. I lived in Boulder for many years, and I think word choices like that help us to convey more than if we say she was in a room full of hippies. And situating her as kind of wearing a professional office wear when everybody else was wearing the drapey cuts and bright patterns. I like the idea of a mirroring scene at the beginning, and then at the end, her Lisbon color, she becomes a much more colorful person. She becomes much more comfortable with her expressing herself in clothes. So positioning herself too in this environment that doesn't really suit her. She's not really a hippie type. And what is she doing in Boulder anyway? Not that everybody has to be the same, but really a big theme in this novel is this quest for a sense of home. I think we think of it often in a place outside of ourselves, but in this story, it's both that and being at home within yourself. Who am I really? How do I want to spend my days? And I think a lot of us have never had the chance to explore that and discover that, and we're following somebody else's script. So to whatever degree that's true for the people who read this, I want even a little bit of permission for us to be a little more ourselves, a little more creatively honored.
And as the listener hearing you read this, I love the scene. You obviously have it together in terms of how to put the writing out there. You also allowed me, the listener, to see Darla buttoned up. I first thought she was among the wealthy, fashionable people with drapes, which hints at the European style. You can be buttoned up and fashionable and very beautifully dressed and still be conservative. Darla can still have whatever it is that suits her fashionably. And when you threw the yurt in, my image of all of those clothes changed to the hippie view, the rainbow tribe, the festive sort of beaded people with the dresses and the flowing outfits, not the fashionable, well-dressed people in Lisbon wearing the flowing outfits. So in that one scene, you gave me all the information I needed to know about where Darla was going to go with her colors.
Oh, good.
Also implying the flag. What kind of flag will you finally plant in the field for all of us to see? And how will it fly? And how will you fly your colors?
I think that's so interesting that you mentioned the flag and you brought that up, because I lead creativity workshops called Capture the Wow. And one of the exercises I like to play with people is symbols, use of symbols like a flag or a crest or a postage stamp. And if you had a flag or a crest or a postage stamp that had symbols that represent you, and maybe you get 3 words. What is Darla's flag? What does that look like? And the idea of planting a flag, not just in the world, but in your own life. This is how I want to spend my time. This is who I want to be.
And the flag carries one's old school coat of arms, maybe. The old families had their family symbols on those flags. So the flag implies, like the brand on a cow, it communicates one's entire story.
One's family story. What if you don't feel like you come from that environment? What if you have to create your own crest and your own?
Then your family begins now. It's a sovereignty issue. How much sovereignty do I have over who I am, and how willing am I to make a stand?
That is a great question. I mean, a phrase too. I love the way you said that. How much sovereignty do I have? And what do I take a stand for?
And that's a question that may change. That's a question that requires answers, and it's a plural opportunity rather than a singular opportunity. I don't just take a stand and then that's it.
Right.
I take the stand and then I revise, and then I move to the future, and then I revise again in the present. So in some ways, the present is where we're working from. And once you spend your time, you will never be able to redeem that time again, in the sense of I'm going to redeem this coin and I will then get something for it. Time is irredeemable. It's gone. You can't do anything with it. You can have this moment, and that's where the flag sits. And when that flag is flying high, you are announcing to the world, I am my own sovereign nation.
I wonder how much we are blind to our own sovereignty. And as I'm thinking about this and the arc of this story, she leaves, her own country and goes to another country. And that's a big leap. Back to this idea of changing our world every day. What if the sovereignty is in every day, in every choice we make? And I really always go back to the creative things we want to do. And I choose not to do it today because I don't have that sovereignty, or I don't want that sovereignty, or I don't realize I have that, versus staying in the safe lane, doing the laundry or doing the things that feel comfortable.
And I'm considering the idea of I don't want the sovereignty, I don't have the sovereignty, 2 very different categories. I don't want the sovereignty is a rejection of what you have. I think we were born sovereign nations. We are the rulers of our kingdom. We are the authors of our story. We are the authority of our being. Now, do we want that? Are we willing to do something with it? What do we do with it? It's a beautiful and overwhelming proposition when you think of the largesse that you possess just because you're alive. No wonder people struggle and stumble around with their creative work and their passions and their destinies.
Just think about all the forces against that. I mean, what was our school experience like? You and I are old enough to have gone to school where it's, sit down and shut up, and you will do what we say. The entire environment is designed against what we're talking about now. So we're kind of swimming upstream for a while until we find our way, until we find the people who point the way to us, like Julia Cameron, The Artist's Way. We've talked about that. When I discovered coaching, it was very much built on my experience with The Artist's Way. It was 5 years later that I discovered coaching. And then I went and did some training, and I was like, this is it. This is the set of tools, the way of thinking and believing and approaching life where I can have that sovereignty. But I was like 30 when I started that. So If I didn't find coaching, I would not have written all the books I've written. I would not have the life I had. I have no idea what I would be doing. I was so grateful to find it because it was like a wizard's bag or a set of tools that I could use, not just for me, but for other people. And the cool thing about it, Nave, is that because I started working as a coach and I started working with writers and artists right away, there was no way I could coach anybody else if I didn't do my own work. I don't know that I would have had the courage or the willingness or the vulnerability, all the things it takes to be the creative person I am if I didn't have that accountability built into my job as a coach. I'm so grateful. I found an article in Utne Reader about coaching, and that's how I got into this.
Well, you're talking about deadlines. I'm going to hold myself accountable for this. I love that idea of accountability. I didn't start thinking about writing as something that I really wanted to do in my life until I was in my late 30s. Prior to that, I had businesses and restaurants, and my whole thrust was I don't want to punch a clock. So I'm going to do anything I possibly can to be able to go to the movies at 2 p.m. And I want to earn money while I do it. And that's a great ideal. Yeah, I don't know if I recommend it. That meant I printed T-shirts. That meant that I sold T-shirts. That meant that I had a hiking store. That meant that I hustled restaurants. That meant that I had a pizza restaurant. That meant this, this, until finally I discovered storytelling.
What's the weirdest job you did?
I don't know if I have a weird job story. I remember once for a day, I worked in a sawmill in Northern California, trying to stay ahead of the curve because I didn't have much money. And I remember standing near the large blade as the large logs went through, and I pulled the boards off, and I hated every minute. And at the end of the day, I quit the job. It was only an 8-hour job. If that, I couldn't stand it. So that's a weird job. The most significant job I've ever had was working as an orderly at Wesley Nursing Center when I was a conscientious objector serving 2 years alternate service in 1973-72. And the alternate service was in lieu of going to Vietnam to fight. And I would clean the bedpans and wash the patients and then sit by their beds in the afternoon while they watched The Guiding Light, General Hospital, and soap operas. I fell in love with soap operas while I was an orderly working at a nursing home. And I was riding my bicycle back and forth to work. I didn't own a car because my Volkswagen had exploded. The engine fell apart. And that was a meaningful job. So I've always had different kinds of work situations that were very meaningful for me.
You extracted the meaning. Even that 8-hour sawmill job was meaningful because I did that once. I worked like at a greenhouse for a day on my knees, and I was like, oh, I am not built for this labor. It taught me so much. And then the courage that I had to do the things I really wanted to do came from those experiences. I remember early days of my coaching business, and I was like, I don't want to write a marketing letter. I don't want to reach out and ask for help and tell people what I'm doing. And this voice said, well, get out your resume, get that going. And then I was like, resume or marketing email? And marketing email. So those painful situations reflect back so much what is not actually working for us that we have to do what we really are here for.
Right. And I grew up in an environment where the men, my father and my grandfather, were not that interested in education. My mother was educated. On my mother's side, we had education going back to the late 1800s. The women were educated. They went to private schools and whatnot. On my father's side, it was more rural. And my father and my grandfather made things. So I grew up around making things, and the education wasn't as important. So that's a tradition that I bring to the table.
Same for me. Yeah, I grew up in rural Ohio, and the best thing about that was I qualified for the mail-a-book program from the library. So I would order books from the library, and they would send them to me in the mail. I love that.
Yeah, it's really interesting to have all these elements, and then just in closing, and you can close after I make this comment about work, and then I want you to make some comments about what work means to you as we go out of our time together. My father and my grandfather worked. I grew up working. My father handed a shovel to me when I was a boy and said, let's go dig in the dirt and make a foundation for the room I'm going to build onto the house. Here's the tool. I was never without work in my life. And some of the best work I've ever had was cutting wood in the forest, loading it into a pickup truck and selling it to somebody for firewood. That was hard, heavy lifting work. I can't do that now. So work is one of the most significant propositions that we can participate in. So I've done a lot of it over the years, and I'm still trying to find my way into its meaning. As in, right now, this is work in the best sense of what work can be. You reflect for a moment on work and tell us how to connect with you, and we'll say goodbye.
Well, I feel like we are the same person in so many ways, with the Paris connection that we haven't talked about, and the room on the back of the house that my dad built. I was not there with the shovel, but anyway, the work ethic was strong and fierce, and it doesn't mean necessarily self-sacrifice. It doesn't necessarily mean manual labor, which manual labor, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not really what I'm built for. I put all that work ethic into revising this novel however many times, working the sentences over, reading it over again and again, humbling myself to the labor of writing, which I think is really difficult. I've been writing for 30 years and I'm far from mastering it, but I'm learning. And my measurement of good work, especially with this novel and with working with my clients, is how much am I learning? What have I learned? Am I growing? And that is what's satisfying and rewarding to me about work. Is that's another way of changing. Like, oh, I know so much more now about the story than I did 2 years ago. And how did I get this far without knowing that? But it doesn't matter. I know it now, and it was super fun to ignite my brain and my intellect and my heart with all the things I've learned.
How do we connect with you so we can stay up on what you're doing and follow your book?
Thank you. My website is originalimpulse.com. That's my company, Original Impulse. And there you can find the workshops I lead in Paris and Lisbon, and my coaching, and then the different writing that I do on my Substacks.
Well, Cynthia Morris, maybe you will come back and we can do more of this. I've enjoyed every second of it.
Thanks, Nave. So have I. Appreciate the invitation.
And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with Cynthia Morris. My conversation with Cynthia reminded me how valuable play is in the writing process. When I was growing up, the idea of play and work were always separated. You go to work, you don't play when you work. Playing comes after you finish work. When Cynthia asked me to identify my weirdest job, I said I worked for a day at a sawmill in Northern California. Now that I think about it, I'm not so sure it was a weird job as much as it was a boring job, standing there hour after hour, flipping the boards off the log as they passed through the blade. I remember standing there in the sound of the sawmill thinking, could I do this day after day after day for a whole year? So the job wasn't the weird job. It was the choice I made to take the job that was the weird choice, because it was so far removed from what I love to do, so far away from play, so far away from my own personality. And yet I also told Cynthia one of my most satisfying jobs was cutting and delivering firewood from the mountains in western North Carolina. So what's the difference in working in the sawmill? You have a blade, you have trees, you have wood cutting, and cutting firewood and delivering it to houses in western North Carolina. You have a blade, you have wood, and you have cutting. Same idea, but two very different propositions. The sawmill was confiding. cutting wood in western North Carolina and delivering it to houses so the houses would be warm was quite freeing. So now we have a contrast between what work is and what freedom is, which in my mind includes play. So on that note, I'd like to close with a couple of literary pieces for you, one that defines work and the other one that looks at play. So let's begin with Philip Levine's poem, What Work Is. We stand in the rain in a long line, waiting at Ford Highland Park for work. You know what work is. If you're old enough to read this, you know what work is, although you may not do it. Forget you. This is about waiting, shifting from one foot to another, feeling the light rain falling like mist into your hair, blurring your vision until you think you see your own brother ahead of you, maybe 10 paces. You rub your glasses with your fingers, and of course, it's someone else's brother, narrower across the shoulders than yours, but the same sad slouch, the grin that does not hide the stubbornness, the sad refusal to give in to rain, to the hours wasted waiting, to the knowledge that somewhere ahead is a man waiting who will say, "No, we're not hiring today," for any reason he wants. You love your brother now. Suddenly, you can hardly stand the love flooding you for your brother, who's not beside you or behind or ahead because he's home trying to sleep off a miserable night shift at Cadillac so he can get up before noon to study his German. Works 8 hours a night so he can sing Wagner, the opera you hate most, the worst music ever invented. How long has it been since you told him you loved him, held his wide shoulders, opened your eyes wide and said those words, and maybe kissed his cheek? You've never done something so simple, so obvious, not because you're too young or too dumb, not because you're jealous or even mean or incapable of crying in the presence of another man. No, just because you don't know what work is. And that was Philip Levine's poem, What Work Is. So now I would like to follow with a reflection on what play is, written by John Frederick Nims in his book, Western Wind, An Introduction to Poetry. And this quote is at the end of the first session in the book my creative collaborator Allegra Houston and I wrote. And the book is titled Write What You Don't Know, and the first session is titled Spin the Kaleidoscope of Your Mind. So here's what John Frederick Nims says about play. When we imagine anything, we are playing with images, combining them as they have never been combined before, perhaps not even in nature itself. Out of such playing with images came primitive ritual and the mythologies of early religion. Out of our playing with rocks and herbs and the mysteries of fire came early science. Out of our playing with hollow reeds or tightened sinews or the beat of bones on deerskin came early music. Musicians still play on their pianos or guitars. And out of our playing with words, with their sounds and shapes and rhythms and the images they conjured, came early poetry, so wonderful that in all parts of the world it seemed a kind of magic. And what I just read was John Frederick Nims reflecting on what poetry is in his book Western Wind, An Introduction to Poetry. So what was your weirdest job? What was your odd job? What is your relationship to what work is? What's your relationship to what play is? How much do those two ideas overlap? Do you play when you work? I'm thinking of the song Whistle While You Work implies I'm playing while I work. Can my work be my play? Can my play be my work? The answer is sure, it can. Sometimes it's not, sometimes it is. Sometimes there's heavy lifting to be done. Sometimes it's easy going. Either way, what work is, what play is, factors into everything we do. And I enjoyed my conversation with Cynthia because she's made me think more and more deeply about the relationship between those two ideas, playfulness and work. And on that note, it's time for us to end our work and our play here at Twice 5 Miles Radio. And it's time for me to say what I always say at the end of the show, which is thank you very much for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio. Fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Nave, always airing first on WPVM LP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org. The voice of Asheville, heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com. For more on Walter's music, Davine Dial, thank you for managing WPVM-FM. Robin Collier, thank you for managing KCEI in Taos, New Mexico. I appreciate it ever so much. If you'd like to reach me, Nave at jamesnave.com. Nave is spelled Nave. I would love to get an email from you. I get very few emails. I don't know why. Maybe yours will land in my box. Who knows? And lastly, I'd like to remind you that we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing skills, imaginativestorm.com is a great place to go. And hey, one last thing. Thank you ever so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you come back very, very soon. Till then, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.